Well, it's the magic witching hour. I had a friend, four-star general. He always began his presentations like this. Well, my name is Stan Goldstein. How do you like me so far? I'll laugh anyway. Anyway, we're here for another journey in life, a program that started some 21 years ago, and Leo Birch had set it up. Often we go to dinner and you meet a new person and you give them bits and pieces of your life. Well, this is a chance to share with new people things that have gone on in your life and how you got here. So I'm hoping that many of you will take the opportunity to do that and give a presentation. The reason I'm giving a presentation, the guy I thought I had signed up finked out on me, and so you're stuck with me. And it happened that a few people said they'd like to hear it again. I'm hoping we'll get Carolyn Parker to give her story, which was a gee whizzer, and I think, and there are others here who come. We've had people, we've had admirals, generals, privates, spies, rocket scientists, bean counters, you name it, and they've all been here and gave great stories. I'm following Hal and Harry, and last few was a great scientist, you know, so I'll try and keep you awake for the next few minutes. You may see that this last time this briefing was given was in 2011, and I did check with Javier to find out how many of the people are still around from that. He claims 20, I only see 3 or 4 here. Bob Geller is here, and I told him if he remembered it.
I was here.
Oh. Chuck is here, and I was saying, and if you remembered it, I don't have to give it, and instead, we could just talk about how much we love the new point system. But at any rate, 4,775 days ago, this pitch was given, and so that's 12.48 years ago. Anyway, so with that, we'll begin the story. Joe wanted to introduce me, but this is such a crazy, screwed up presentation. All I can say is it's the story of a young Jewish kid, grew up in the Bronx, learned to live his life, a dream, and is here today to share his story with all you folks. And thank you very much for coming. Okay, grew up on Marcy Place in the Bronx. Now I live in Marcy Street, sort of close. Joe was born on in 304 Court Street. We're now at 403. Maybe that's the back end of that number, and all the points between. So it's the story, as it says there, of a very fortunate person. I can call myself in this presentation sort of a foreign scum. Not the slow-witted portion, but the fact, though some of you may think that. But it's the story of how he goes through life and how life is, a box of chocolates, and you never know what you're going to get. So you'll hear some of my chocolates. Okay, journey, obviously the early years, get into the Air Force, get out of the Air Force, and then wind up at this great place. Here's the kid. The hair is pretty much the same, still stands up. I took a haircut before I got here to try and get it down. My dad was a diamond setter. My mother worked for Hearst Corporation and did the things they helped to get the magazines out every month. Anyway, kid grew up in the street playing stickball. I could hit a Spalding 2.5 sewers, if that means anything to you. By the way, fighter pilots do wear scarves, but I'll take this off. I got to ride the subway at an early age of about 10 years, and it was safe to do it then. Times have changed. Okay, aviation interest. The movies, the news, and the flights. I also used to make model airplanes, carving them out of wood. I wasn't too good, so many of them turned into submarines. Anyway, Les had this slide, but his was in black and white, so here's the color version of John Wayne doing Wings Adventures and such, and that was great. July 25th, a few days before my birthday, a B-25 going from Long Island crashed into the Empire State Building. And obviously every 9/11, this is what comes to mind first. In fact, when I first heard about it, that's what I thought was happening. And then there's the nuclear weapons and the war. And I do have a relationship to this. I'll talk about it a little bit more. But the gentleman who dropped the second bomb became a class leader and a friend of mine. He also taught me how to drink gin. He put the bottle in the freezer. First flight was in a Piper Cub, my 12th birthday. My dad and I pedaled a bike to Rockaway Airport, and we took off and flew over Idlewild, which is now known as JFK. And then I get my first flight in a jet in June of '55 at Hunter Air Force Base in Georgia. June 6th, Mom pins on my gold bars and the game starts there. CDZNOKSRVH. What is that? To fly in the Air Force and be a pilot, you have to have 20/20 vision. It's a way of sorting out. Anyway, this is the 2050 line. As long as I can read this line without glasses, I don't need any waiver. So the power could go out, I could still give them the right letters. Okay, off to flying school, Harlingen Air Force Base. Where's Harlingen? It's about 28 miles north of Brownsville, where you saw various presidents go worrying about the border. I graduate in '57, and then I'm off to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, and where I become involved in electronic warfare training. And I graduate first in my class, so I get a chance of assignments. Now, what happened is, there's Strategic Air Command and there's Tactical Air Command. I didn't want any part of Strategic Air Command, which to me, SAC, simulate, authenticate, and cheat, but they do things by the numbers, and I never would have made it through the Air Force if I was involved with them. Anyway, getting first, when I leave there, go to Stead Air Force Base up by Reno, and we go through winter survival training. Everybody thought you need winter survival training because the next war we're going to be involved in is going to be wrong. Anyway, first assignment is to Germany, Spangdahlem Air Force Base. I think if you go to the Willow Tree, the guy is real close. His town was, his home is about 5 miles away from there. Anyway, this is a reconnaissance jet, and in the back bay, it was designed as a bomber, but then they converted it to reconnaissance. They took out the bomb bay and they put 4 electronic warfare officers in the back with downwind ejection. I didn't like that, but anyway, I did that for about 400 or 500 hours, and then there was an opening up front, and I got to fly as a navigator, and I got to fly different aircraft all over Europe and have a much better time. This is Germany. De Gaulle doesn't have nuclear weapons, so he kicks all the F-100s and their tactical nukes out of France. And where do they go? Spangdahlem. We got to go someplace. So, I got to be a two-handed paper. We go to England, and we're now at Chelmsford, England. It's very nice. I have a manor house from the 17th century, gardener, maid, squash court, stables, and 176 steps to the local bar. Besides which, the girls spoke English. I do that for 3 years, and then suddenly I'm now at Hill Air Force Base flying the B-57, a British aircraft. I start my life as being a target. What did we do? We went out and trained all the fighters, gave them a chance to shoot at us with film, and luckily no bullets. I also got to fly the B-57D Long Wing. This was the forerunner to the U-2. And as such, I was up above 60,000 feet. Before every flight, You got steak, eggs, and cottage cheese. You had to sneak across the room to get the salt and pepper. And when you landed, you got another physical, and they gave you a little miniature bottle of either Old Methuselah or Krishna Brothers brandy. Anyway, this is how you dress for one of those flights. And a lot of the guys would lose 5-6 pounds sweating it out after landing. So I'm one of the few people who've been flying above 60,000 feet and been through the Mach. So that's the club I belong to. Here are all the fighters that we flew against. There's 104, 89, 86, 102, 106, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, suddenly there's a Cuban Missile Crisis. It's a Sunday, taking off from Tyndall Air Force Base up in a panhandle, blow a tire, have to go back, get the tire fixed, we take off. So long flight, turn on the radio. There's a Cuban Missile Crisis. And so that war was on. You can see the YouTube there, and that would be the second aircraft we had lost. You remember Francis Gary Powers gets shot down over Russia. Anderson gets shot down here by an SA-2. And Joe and I have been to Havana and saw the missiles and parts of his airplane that they still have on display in Havana. I show these pictures again because as we were leaving, all these airplanes are coming south to Florida. Florida sinks about 3 inches from the level of all the aircraft that came. The problem is these guys want target practice right now, but now they've got nuclear missiles on board and bullets in their guns. And so I say to them, call them, and they say, we'd like some target practice. And I said, yes, make sure your armament safety switch is off so you can't shoot us down, for real. A year before, an F-100 had everything shut off, but he wound up shooting down a B-52. So you want to be a little bit careful. Anyway, you put your time in, 5 years in the cockpit, and the Air Force says, hey, you gotta go get a master's degree. So I'm off to Missouri, University of Missouri. What is happening while I'm there in university? Kennedy gets assassinated. I can still remember at 12:30, the guy comes in and says he shot me. Go down to the bar and drink and stuff like that. The Gulf of Tonkin starts up. First POW, Lieutenant Alvarez, USN, becomes the first POW, and the first F-105 gets shot down. And one thing, and I'll say this, you've all heard me joke around and say, I'm one of the inmates here. What I really mean by that, what comes to my mind, is all the guys who got shot down and became a band of brothers and worked together. And that's how I feel with all you people, that you're my band of brothers and sisters. So that's why I say that. Anyway, payback is a bitch, and they send me off to Armadillo, Texas. And best thing about it was only 5 hours to Taos, Mexico for skiing. But anyway, I'm counting little numbers there and saying how many instructors they need. Luckily for me, the kid lucks out another chocolate. They shut the base down, and I get to go to Randolph Air Force Base. And during the 20s and 30s, this was where the guys learned how to fly, and all the cadets went. And we're in their old quarters. In fact, my office still had the mirror and the sink, from the cadet days. McNamara liked his own answers. I had a million calculations that proved we needed more instructor pilots. Well, they didn't like if you needed more. They loved me when I said you needed less. Sounds like headquarters, but Anyway, it's a Friday afternoon. Things always happen on a Friday afternoon, and they say, come on down to personnel. Go Thule down there, and they said, you're going to Weasel School in 2 months. Ooh. And first thought comes to my mind, I've heard about the Weasels. Am I going to be brave enough to do this? How am I going to handle really combat? Hadn't thought about it. Well, a movie had just been made by the Air Force called There Is a Way, and you can see it online on YouTube. There's a 30-minute version and such. But really, it was about all the fighter pilots, the 105 guys say, there's no way to get 100 missions, and they say smoking is injurious to our health. What a joke. So anyway, they make this film, There Is a Way, and I get to watch it a couple of times, and then anyway, Here's an excerpt from a briefing I've given numerous times to high schools, to colleges, to religious organizations, to Embry-Riddle and other places. And one that really hit me the most, at the 50th anniversary, they had the wives of the original Weasels in the room. And afterwards, they came up and thanked me because they had never known what their husbands had done before. So that was a kick to me. Okay, North Vietnam, loaded with all the threats. They didn't have many threats, so they went to their buddies, the Russians, and the Russians sent them down 8,000 anti-aircraft guns like World War II, the 85s and everything. They got 400 radars, and then 150 MiGs. They had old new ones. They got some of the new 21s, and 40 SA-2 sights, the fan storm, which is what the Weasel was supposed to go out. They wound up getting 9,000 missiles, and in 1973, at the end of Linebacker 2, they were down to their last 100 or 2 missiles, what they were doing. One of my other cheating slides, this is an SA-2 fan song. It has a horizontal beam, and here it has a vertical beam, and they have these 2 beams, and when you're in the middle of the beams, they can shoot at you, and they direct it with this, and this gives direction to the missile. Here are the number of aircraft lost. You can read the numbers yourself. The SAMs didn't kill that many, but it forced us to redesign our tactics and change the area at which we could fly and operate out of. Here's a missile in a museum. They're nice and clean here and all that good stuff. And here's the missile, all nice and clean. At the back end is the last 6 feet with the fins. That is a booster. And when it takes off, 6 seconds after the missile takes off, the booster falls. Now, the Vietnamese said we were bombing hospitals and schools. Not really. What happens is they put them missiles just like the other bad people do. They put them right next to the hospital and the school so you won't shoot at them. But when this falls off, where's it going to go? Right where the hospitals and the schools. Here's a picture of one actually being shot off, and people would complain, why are you showing such a crummy picture? This is a picture of some poor schlub crawling under barbed wire with a little Minox camera in East Germany and taking this picture. So if you want to see the pretty ones, you have to go to a museum. Here's what a missile looks like in flight. We called it a flying telephone pole, about 32 feet long. The game starts on July 24, 1965. We, the JCS, the CIA, told McNamara and LBJ, they're building these SA-2 sites. Take them out now before they're built so they can't shoot at us. McNamara says, they won't shoot at us. I mean, they wouldn't dare. Besides which, there may be Russians in those vans, and we don't want to perturb the Russians, do we?
Oh my God. Sounds familiar.
Things never change. So, what's a weasel? Specially trained crews, fighters with special sensors. You can read that, weapons and tactics. Mission to kill and suppress SAMs and contribute to air superiority. Here's what a SAM looks like. Oops. Coming up at a 105. Now, the game is, if you could see the missile, you could hopefully defeat him. You'd put the missile at either 10 o'clock or 2 o'clock, and then until your underwear couldn't hold it anymore, you would take it and push the nose of your airplane down. And the SA-2 missile would come and follow you down. Once again, being notified by your underwear, you would start to pull back up, and hopefully the missile had very short, stubby wings, so it couldn't make it and you'd escape. Unless, of course, they had launched a second one, and you're out of airspeed in ideas. That wouldn't be a good day. Anyway, Wild Weasel Mission, Iron Hand, that's a Navy term, but you go up there and we'd go in front of all the forces, protect them, wait for them to do their shit, and then we'd come out. And then if you had nothing else to do that day or another day, you'd go down truly in the weeds and say, hey, shoot at me so I can find you and shoot back at you. They used to call this defense suppression, but the Europeans and the Germans didn't like that, so they changed the name to C, Suppression of Enemy Air Defenses. I thought a better name might be Suppression of Hostile Intercept Terminals, but SHIT doesn't make. Got so many things here. What happens next? Anyway, here's a flight of two 105s. The bottom one is an F model, much prettier because it's 36 inches and has room for me in it. And then the D model that did most of the bomb dropping in Vietnam. However, in this case, we are leading the D model to also shoot strikes. We would pull up 3, 2, 1 and tell them to launch the strike, and so we could hose them off. Anyway, there's a Wild Weasel model. What happens is people are invited to the Pentagon. They say, we've got a secret mission, can't tell you what it is, very dangerous, and if you want to, here's an airplane ticket, otherwise go home. With the airplane ticket, you wind up in this hangar in the F-100 manufacturers, North American, and they explain what the mission is. So my buddy, my mentor, friend, long time, Jack Donovan says, let me get this straight. You're going to put me in the backseat of a crazy fighter pilot and have me be a target for the SAMs? You got to be shitting me. Now, all the EWOs came out of B-52s and big airplanes, so, you know, they hadn't been in fighters. Fighter pilots don't like anybody in the backseat anyway, and they'll tell them to go cold Mike. But it was a marriage there. The first SAMs kill, that Jack Donovan that I just mentioned, on December 22nd with an F-100. And it was a dangerous mission. They sent over about 12 aircraft and they lost half of them in the first couple of weeks. It was learned by doing. There was insufficient training, which is something that I will elucidate on more. But in other words, you went up there. If you came home, you must have done something right. We'll try it again. Anyway, these guys, Alan Lamb and Donovan, creep down, find the target, and we get our first kill. And this painting is by Keith Ferris, a friend of mine. You'll hear more about Keith. Okay, we got a patch. There's Wild Weasel 1, which are the F-100s. There's Wild, blah, 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 Wild. We're up to Wild Weasel 7 now, but I was in Wild Weasel 3. Well, when you go to school, this is a mission where they figured out, let the crews find out who they want to fly with, because it's really teamwork and you really want to know who you're flying with. I wrote off some guys because they had already been to North Vietnam, had missions, and what means is when they had 100 missions, you might still have another 13 or 15 left to go, and you'd be stuck to fly with the staff, and you don't want to fly with these colonels or, you know, anyway. So, on the right is John Revac, my forward-facing bird deflector, and on the left is old Watash. And the reason we crewed up, in the class, we were the only two bachelors. He was a quiet guy from Brooklyn, a good Catholic, and I'm a noisy guy from the Bronx. So anyway, we become a team. Joe hates to hear me say this, but that's sort of my first marriage. John is still alive, and he's down in a CCRC in San Antonio, Texas, and we chat very regularly. Here's the beast we learned to fly, two-holer. You can see I don't know if you can see the ladders going up there. It was rumored that Republic built the ladders first and then built the aircraft. By the way, this is the only Air Force aircraft I've flown. Everything else has either been Navy or British. Okay, we learned to fly the aircraft. You can read that. Learned to operate the equipment, all that other mush and Scott. And at the bottom, learn Las Vegas. You got to go down the strip, learn how to do things down there. Here's what we didn't have, a good threat simulator. I point this out. Each of those different antennas, it simulates a different threat. We didn't have squad up there, and it was one there, and maybe once in a while they let us go to a SAC site and use theirs, which I would take great umbrage about and tell you about. Here's the name of the game. You have all this fancy schmancy stuff today. This is the dark ages. If you compare this to a rotary dial phone to your iPhone, is what you get. In essence, many of you may have had a fuzzbuster in your car before that told you where the cops were. Same thing, except you had a scope here, and each of those lines represents a different threat. This is the test signal to show you that the system actually works. But the longer the strobe, the closer you are to the threat and in which directions it's going. But that's what we relied on. You looked out, saw it coming, or if you were far enough away, you looked on the scope. Here's my office, the scope with the hood on it. Okay, and with the whole. Now below is another piece of equipment. If you had time, you could analyze it. If there wasn't any time, you just want to find out where the rascal was, get him before he got you. What we had, this was a Shrike, $45,000, 148 pounds, and not very accurate. If the missile site shut down, it went and went into the ground. So the Navy comes up with another missile. Now this is another couple of 100 pounds more. It's got memory circuits in it, but even this only had about a 28% success rate. Here's another thing. How does this happen? Somehow they say I'm the class leader. There's going to be a graduation party, and this is Kitty the cat girl, Lynn, the head stripper of the place we're going that night. She's a little bit tall, as you can see. I had to, so I could go eye to eye with her. And then, of course, there's the party I got wrapped up in. Next morning, it's a Friday morning, hungover, listening to fuses. The guy up there, the ops officer, says, Navy lost the boat to Pueblo. We're going to sneak there and be ready to go north if we're going to start a war. So we start a briefing, what we're going to do. The guy at the front with his finger is a mentor, and Billy Sparks. He was a mentor to me, not only as a weasel, but also on the ski slopes of Aspinosian, which I'll talk about later. Anyway, we're talking about what we're going to do, how we're going to do it. Air Force says, all you married guys, go home, be with your wives, and start packing. Not you, Goldstein and Revac. You don't have any wives. We're going to the flight line and we want to take pictures. In the military, if you ain't got a picture, it didn't happen. So they take all these hero pictures of us, blah, blah, blah. Next morning, they're handing out money, shots. Long underwear. We're supposed to be going to Southeast Asia, kid. You know it's hot. No, you're going to Osan, it's 27 degrees. It's midnight Saturday night, and we're about to take off in a C-141. John and I are the leaders for this event, and they always have a little religious session. Tom, you'll get a little credit for that. And we had our blessings, and we're off and running. We're trying to sneak into Osan because it's a secret. No one's supposed to know we're coming. Meanwhile, one of the crew chiefs tells his girlfriend, who tells the local Las Vegas Gazette what's going on. So it says everybody knows except us, doesn't know that we know. Anyway, so we sneak into Osan, become a member of the 12th TAC Fighter Squadron. They have a Quonset hut there, and left over from Korea, so we painted up, and then we put a nice burning stove that's going to be hot, and then once again, Goldstein gets it. The squadron commander says, Goldstein, I want a toilet for this facility. Toilet? There wasn't any on the base. In fact, I thought about sneaking into his room and stealing the one out of his room. Anyway, John and I get to go to Tachikawa on R&R, and we do our thing, buy all the little magic electronics you can get there from Japan. And I'm sitting in the bar bemoaning my situation, how I can't find a toilet. There's a guy in a black suit and a white shirt and a black tie sitting at the end of the bar and sort of leasing. I don't know if he's OSS or if he's Secret Service for the Air Force or what. Anyway, I get back to Osan 3 days later over the loudspeaker, Goldstein, come down to base ops and get your toilet. Well, pictures, if it didn't happen, they take your picture. So if you get shot down, the guy in the helicopter looks at the picture and says, yeah, that looks like Goldstein, we'll pick him up. And you'll see the mustache. In Rebellion, doing something different, try and change your luck, John and I started growing mustaches. Would shave them off before we go into combat, because if you don't, you'd have to wear it all the way. You don't want to change things. Anyway, we're off to snake school. They called it snake school. I was more concerned about the rats because guys had salt on their fingers and the rats would nibble on their fingers at night, so I slept with my flying clothes on. There was one of our Negrito instructors who taught us how to get water out of trees, how to hide, and such like that. Here's a place. The last time I had a cold water operation, I had lost the soap there. But anyway, that was the last time I had a cold water bath, some 50, 60 years ago, until last week when our hot water heater went out. Lenny found out about it, and then 5 hours later we did finally have a hot water heater. Anyway, it's showing up to Quran. And they take pictures of you so you can send back to your mom and say, hey mom, look at me. And then there's John and I in front of our aircraft. Once again, as I say, the ladders come first and then they build the aircraft. Here is North Vietnam, and you can sort of see a pink coloring around there. Those are how much the SAM sites cover. In their brilliant wisdom, they divide North Vietnam into route packages. You got the Navy and you got the Air Force. And if you want to drop and do something in the Navy's area, you got to ask for permission. So we divide the place up, and then we get just north of Thud Ridge, called Thud Ridge because a lot of the thuds were shot down there. At the same time, because it's a ridge, you can duck down below the ridge and the radar can't see you. Anyway, problem is if you had MiGs chasing you, and they would try and do that, and then they would run north into China. But you can't go into China. It's a Beano. You're getting bad trouble. Anyway, typical, you plan a mission, and I think the only reason I put this in, I had this lovely model aircraft, and you'll notice the advanced technology computer in the lower right hand, EA6B, digitally operated. Anyway, this is what a strike package looked like. Wish this light was better here. You've got the 105s going in first, trying to quiet the SAMs. You got the strike force, 24, 48, whatever, and then you got the MIGCAPs, hopefully to stop any MiGs that would come through. You had B-66, that old airplane I used to fly. It's now full of jammers, and they would jam the radar. They used to be in closer, but one got shot down, so they moved them back out here. Anyway, before every flight, you have to check your bombs and such. One quick, I don't know if I got enough time, but hopefully we'll get you to your buffet, spend your 20 points. But anyway, here's a dumb bomb. World War II, 500 pounds. But SAC in its infinite wisdom says, we don't need no more stinking dumb bombs. We got nukes. So they sell off all the bomb casings. Suddenly they run out of bombs. So we had to buy them back from the Germans. And with equal opportunity, the local chaplain came out and says, "Do you mind if I give you blessings?" "Hey, I'm equal opportunity, kid." And so we get the guard squad to bless us on the way out. And it's off to the tanker to fly there. I got to learn to fly the airplane enough I could get up there and hold it in that position. And he was actually taking on gas. The 105 is the only aircraft that can both do this probe and drobe, plus you see all these other ones, shuttlecocks and stuff like that you do it with. Here's attacking off at Thud Ridge. You can see all the bombs below and pop up. We dropped as much bombs or more bombs than they did in World War II. Here's this 100-kilo mission. We had nothing else to do, so you had a flight or two. The lead guy would go and see if the guys would come up and shoot at you, and then the number two says, "I got him," and then you try and get another kill. The B-52s, and they're still flying, 80 years, they'll be flying for 100 years. They've got grandchildren flying in this airplane. 102 bombs, but they wouldn't go unless the weasels were there in front of them, between them and the nearest SAM site. We had another mission. In the military, you fight for money. And the Navy was dropping bombs at night with their radar A6. So General Ryan, that's what we call Ryan's Raiders, says, "What do we got that can drop bombs?" 105's got a radar. We were designed, 105's radar was designed to drop nukes. 700 feet isn't bad with a nuke, but you know, if you're trying to drop a bomb. And one night, I forgot to hit a wrong button, and I was 3 miles off, but I still got an explosion. They said, "Goldstein's here, we don't know how to hide from him." One of the big things in Southeast Asia is making patches. Gotta have patches or it didn't happen. But notice the spelling. They didn't have spell check the Thai tailor, so profession ain't spelled correct. Anyway, here's a dead SAM site, and once again, I cheat. This is not an Egyptian, this is not a Vietnam SAM site. It happens to be an Egyptian SAM site, and it was sent to me by one of my Israeli students who eventually became chief of staff of the Israeli Air Force. But anyway, inside they found a Shrike motor. Okay, 99 missions and counting. The big thing over there is to get 100 missions. Comes to the point in life, and suddenly land after my 99th mission, and the Bangkok Post says, "LBJ says, we ain't going north anymore, I'm not going to run, and that's it going north." I quickly run down to the squadron commander and said, "Hey, send us up again this afternoon." We did a morning launch, and they didn't like to do that. They were always worried sending you off a second time. It was, you know, two rolls of the dice. They thought that was bad. So anyway, we're now 25 days into it. We're flying. It was really dangerous where we were flying. We were flying outside the pack, stacked at different levels. We had C-130s at one level. We had other planes at other level. We're here, and you're flying in a circle outside. Well, the only planes that could go north were the RF-4Cs, photo birds, and they're accompanied by an F-4D. Now, the bad thing in flying is it's okay to be number one, because you wake the guys up. Number two, he takes it. Sure enough, number two gets shot down, and all of a sudden they're trying to do search and rescue. And they say, "Anybody in the area got ordnance?" Flight lead says, "We do." Go in there. The only problem is the guy, Francisco and the other guys had landed right next to a Vietnamese army encampment. They spoke to him on the day. They couldn't get him out that night, and they were never heard from again. But their dog tags wound up in the North Vietnamese Military Museum, and they claimed that was their 1,000th shot down. By the way, talking about shoot downs and stuff, the job, as I saw it as a weasel, was to make this book smaller. This is a book that lists every single Vietnam fixed-wing aircraft that was shot down by date, by name, and how the event happened. So the weasels were trying to make this book as small as possible. Okay, so we get in there and we get to go back and have a 100 mission party. They hadn't had a 100 mission party in 25 days, and there was a big thing. You go there and the guys who got the 100 missions, they ring the bell and you buy booze for everybody. John and I went there. We ran the club out of champagne and cognac from 75s. A few pictures show you. Anyway, this is John and I. We're a little bit younger. And in the middle is Roxy. Who is Roxy? Roxy's an Army major who was the VD control officer to make sure that the girls downtown were all clean. On the flight line, as we had our 100th, is this gentleman, Keith Ferris, head of the Air Force Aviation Artist Society, and we speak, and I say, if you're ever going to paint a thud, would you paint mine? And he calls it big brass ones. And it was in the Pentagon. They had it in the Chief of Staff's office, and they would let me sneak in there and sit and look at it. The only thing in my life I ever thought I'd like to steal, but you can't steal a 14-foot painting very easily, but I have plenty of copies now. There are copies of this in the Air Force Museum and in Dayton, and also in the New River Rat Museum. There's what the airplane is, 424, that's why my call sign, my email is stud424, and the name of the bird is Crown 7. So that's us. Here's today's wild weasel. I mean, they do the job, they're all shtick. It's a single seat. So what happened to the guy, the Ewok? That's me. 110 pounds of aluminum and 10 circuit boards. Pretty, ain't I? Anyway, what happens next? John and I get sent as instructors to George Air Force Base, which is right by Victorville, California, which is halfway between the watering hole between LA and Vegas. And anyway, I get to instruct in the plane, and for some reason they make me the liaison officer with the Israelis. Couldn't figure that out. Anyway, Rabin was the ambassador at the time. He comes, he gets to fly. The guy in the middle is Avihu Ben-Nun, who would become chief of staff of the Israeli Air Force, and sent me that picture. They sent 6 pilots and 4 navigators to learn. As soon as they got 10 hours in the airplane, they wanted to run home because all their buddies were shooting down more Egyptian MiGs, but we made them stay for the full course. Okay, Friday afternoon, go to your new place. You're going to Langley Air Force Base. So I get to develop tactron, and I learned to write papers defending us against the other Air Force commands. Strategic Air Command, we're better than the Navy. But my big chocolate was, I get to meet Joe. And then 2 years there, and then suddenly I get to go to the Pentagon, replacing Jack Donovan, who you've heard me talk about before. He had gotten in trouble with a couple of generals, so I went to replace him. So the Pentagon years, well, there was the Yom Kippur War, and I got to go there and collect some goodies. And one of the big things I had wanted to do my entire career, once I went through weasel training, was to make sure that the crews that came after me would have a good training range. So I started to build training ranges. And I built one at Spade Adam in the UK, on the border between Scotland and such. Now, most of you have heard of Area 51. There are no aliens there, but that's where all the secret equipment that we have inherited from the Israelis and such, the MiGs were there, we had real SAMs there, and so this general and I get to go there and look and see, what the real stuff looks like, and then we're off to Spade Adam to build that range. And then married Joe on April 3rd, and that was a good deal. What had happened during the Yom Kippur War, I was over there for 30 days, and that was the first time I had been away from Joe for that long, and I missed her. And then we get selected for a NATO assignment. Friday afternoon, hey, you want to go to Oslo, Norway? Call Joe. She says, don't bother me. I'm making food for the party tonight. So anyway, we did go. Oh, here's my electronic warfare training. That we had all this equipment. SAC had all this equipment, and one of these pieces of equipment was going back for refurbishment. Somehow I was able to redirect it and to get it to the Philippines, where the guys who were fighting the war could actually get some training on it. Here's that simulator. This is just a generic model, and I wanted to make sure that everybody could train. If you don't, you go to a driving, you play golf, you warm up before you go. So this is what I wanted to help them do. Yom Kippur War, I'm in there briefing some generals on the new SA-6. Get home and found out my father had been killed in a crash coming home from synagogue. But, and that's where I said I realized how much I had missed Joe. Get to go to Egypt. That's Ariel Sharon on the left. I saw a battlefield of 1,000 dead Israeli and Egyptian tanks. And they're not all destroyed. They're just little bullet holes in it. They have this piercing thing that goes in there, rattles around, and kills everybody. I said, I don't think I really want to drive in a tank, really. On the right is a piece of equipment used to direct radars. It was originally developed in World War II and given to the Russians, and then the Russians gave them to their buddies, the Vietnamese. Here I am in the middle of the Suez Canal. We didn't take our uniforms over, but that's a wattage there. There's the SA-6 that had caused us concerns. I was going to ship it. I was in charge of shipping that back to the States. And anyway, they sent a C-141 in. And they were going to have to cut off those rails. I said, no one's cutting off my rails. So I said, I want a C-5. So I leave it in the hangar with a bunch of LL 707s, and they say that, this C-5's coming in. Come out. It's gone. It's gone. Where did they do with it? They had put it outside, covered it with a tarp, and luckily I didn't lose 60,000 pounds, of course. And there's the kid in Norway. I got to go around and brief the Norwegians on how to use electronic warfare and how to train. We had Canadian, UK, German, Denmark. Some of these people are still friends today. And it's sort of been neat. Another time, and I wind up in assigned to the Panhandle, Fort Walton Beach. As my boss over said, it was all downhill from there. And anyway, I become chief of one of the guys of Green Flag, electronic combat training. And I wanted to work on developing EC training ranges, and I did. And I got to do briefings, and sort of the start of my briefing career. And then afterwards, I retire in '83, become a marketing engineer, building black boxes or selling black boxes to the various services, and also helping the Egyptians now, who are now buddies, build a EW range. Get involved in various operations. That Somalia one, we saw Black Hawk down. I happen to know the pilot who was drugged through the streets naked. One of my birthdays, Bush Sr. had jumped out of an aircraft, so I went up to the land and jumped out of an aircraft, which was really one of the most exciting things that ever happened to me. We're coming down, and all of a sudden, pull the chute, it gets quiet. I'm turning around, and I can see Daytona, I can see everything. And the first thing that comes to mind is, nobody's shooting at me. So I thought that was neat. And then on the left is, I'm at Steamboat in a group called Aspenosium. It's a group of fighter crews, and we're either drinkers with a skiing problem or skiers with a drinking problem. We haven't figured out which, but they meet the last Friday of every February at Steamboat. I'm trying to stay busy. I wind up being a board member in the Springs and various organizations I'm involved in. I start to research and write wild weasel history. belonged to the university club, so I set up a training program there. I then started up the training program here in Lookout and get Gary Becker to do a fantastic job. And then I started to help writing history. This guy, F-16 driver, thought he was the world's greatest driver, but when it came time to write this book, and he titles it The Extraordinary Stories of the First Wild Weasels, the band of maverick aviators who flew the most dangerous missions of the Vietnam War. And strangely enough, that's John and I on that front cover. One of those pictures left over. The author was upset because we didn't have on our speed jeans, our G suits on. But anyway, there's books in the library. Chapter 9 is mine called Warts on a Frog, and that refers to how I describe electronic warfare in the early days. It's interesting about electronic warfare. It now makes the newspaper with the drones and everything else being done, the missiles being launched. In peacetime, no one cares about it. Suddenly, we have now come out of the back and we're now accepted way to be in combat. If you go to the museum, there's a digitized copy of big brass ones. When you give things to a museum, they don't really care about them and they throw them in the back room. So I wasn't going to give him my party suit. Well, John must have eaten too much Twinkies and he gives him his flying suit. So I said, I'll give him mine. When the curator found out that he had flying suits of one of the very few crews that flew 100 missions together, he put his flight suit in there and then had this so nose gunners and bears, and all the pictures we had taken. You can see me on the back of a Japanese cannon, and then being thrown in a pool. You always get hosed down and thrown at the pool at the end of your 100 missions. Let me say one thing about the 100 missions. I would gladly have flown another 100 missions before I did what Mike Corbett did. I wouldn't walk 30 minutes in a rice paddy with a machine gun on my shoulder. I take my hat off to Mike. It seems I get invited to brief all over the place. Last year, Air Force Association was celebrating the 50th end of the Vietnam War, and they said, Goldstein, come up and tell us how Wild Weasel operation was. So they paid my way. That was good. Hopefully at the end, Smithsonian made an hour-long film. Actually, it's really more about Robin Olds and Operation Bolo, but there's a 5-minute clip. If I'm smart enough to figure out what Isabella's help, we'll show you that clip. Still on in time. Anyway, I arrive at Village on the Green in March, and what do I do? Join all the committees, such. I'm walking up here in the summer month. I got my jacket over my shoulder and a shirt and tie on. The military, we were smarter than this. You don't need to wear a jacket and tie. So I got that changed for 2 months. The next year they changed it for 4 months, and now you can wear whatever you want, it seems, any place you want. But that was one of the things. Change the bylaws, try to make them so they're more responsive to you guys, and didn't give all the power to the resident chair. I wanted the rest of the board to be in power. I run some Memorial Day celebrations and parades as required. Computer instructions, yes, I got that with Gary. And of course, I thought we need to have a Super Bowl and some of our Kentucky Derby events, helped by Sue Popejoy, of course. And then with Joe, we did birthday parties for 2 years following the Gus's. First year was sort of easy because it was live. Then came the COVID. So then all of a sudden, Rhonda said, what do you want to do? So what we wound up is we made a video, and Joe would research and learn more about Indian moons and stuff that you ever knew. We had a happy birthday song in various different languages. Anyway, we tried to play, like a TV couple, and it went over okay. Here's a Veterans Day. That's Sandy Gonzalez. Sandy Gonzalez was a 19-year-old B-17 driver. And I sort of took over the Veteran Day events from him, and this is before the parade. And of course, he had slacked down a little bit and had to drive his electric cart, not as fast as his B-17. And then got to stand behind here and sing and dance for Memorial Days and other stuff. River Rat Society belonged to that. Wild Weasel Society belonged to that. Air Warrior Courage Foundation. We are a group that found out we couldn't give money to ourselves through the River Rat, so we set that up. I don't know if I have enough time to tell you how that starts, but what we do, I get the thrill of going around to all the local universities and give them a $2,000 grant to each of the ROTC detachments. And they really love it when they give you money. It's not my money, but it's nice. But what it really is, if there are any veterans, active duty, retired, or just veterans who get in financial trouble, we can evaluate your situation. They had a hurricane up in Tyndall. We sent $250,000 and a couple of our buddies up there to help those troops who suddenly couldn't be on base. They were locked down. You had to give them money to live in a hotel. And not like the military organizations, they didn't have to repay it. So that's one thing. Life is a bunch of trouble, and mostly they were pretty good. Here's my final concluding thoughts. And I got this really from the Crown thing when Prince Philip was talking to his sister. Be a participant, not an observer. And what goes back to my, I guess, industrial engineering days, and why I'm opening my mouth all the time, is look around and see what you can do to make the place and things better around you. Thank you very much for coming.